All right. It is 3:01 Eastern Time. Looks like we have quite a few folks in attendance, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in, and anyone else who joins, we will welcome them as they come. Thank you all so much for being here today and taking time out of your busy days to join us for our webinar. Today's session is going to be focused on responding to staff satisfaction surveys. Really looking forward to getting into it with you all. As a lot of you may know, oh, excuse me, first things first, we got to take care of our housekeeping. Just so you're aware, today's session is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be provided to all registrants and will be posted up on our website after today's session, so you will be able to access those afterwards. If you are here, you are registered for today's session, and you will also be sent the slides directly. We'd love to hear from you. I would love to hear your questions, your thoughts, your ideas, your successes, your challenges. Please feel free to use the chat box throughout today's presentation. I will keep an eye on that and do my best to respond to anything you all have to say, but would really love to hear from you. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please feel free to send a message to my lovely colleague, Mariah Blake. She is on the line. You can also send a note in the chat. You can select just to host and hosts and panelists, and that'll go right to us as well. She's happy to help if you have any trouble at all. And last but not least, at the end of today's session, there will be an evaluation that pops up right on your screen. It's just a couple questions. It's very quick, and we really do appreciate your participation in that. Your feedback is really critical to making sure that our programming is relevant and timely and meeting all of your needs. So thank you in advance for doing that. And we'll remind you all again at the end of today's session. So I think that's it for our boring housekeeping things for today. As many of you know, we are here today on behalf of the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved, or ACU. We were founded almost 30 years ago now by alumni of the National Health Service Corps, and really everything we do at ACU is focused on supporting the workforce at community health centers. So lots of wonderful resources and trainings and support programs available. When you have some time, please feel free to pay a visit to ACU's website and learn about all the other fantastic things that we have going on. But we are here today specifically as representatives of the STAR² Center, which stands for Solutions, Training, and Assistance for Recruitment and Retention. We sit underneath the ACU umbrella, and we are funded here at the STAR Center through a national cooperative agreement by the Bureau of Primary Health Care, or BIPIC, and the Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA. We are funded alongside 21 other phenomenal organizations, and we are all what is known as National Training and Technical Assistance Partners, or NTAPs. And each of these 22 organizations, us included, has a different area of focus. Ours here at the STAR Center is all things workforce recruitment and retention. And so we are delighted to be able to provide support and resources to all of you in all of the wonderful work that you're doing at your health centers, your primary care associations, your partner organizations, wherever you may be. And the way that our funding is set up, all of our resources, all of our training, all of our technical assistance is all available to you free of charge, including today's webinar. So we're delighted to be able to provide that for you. When you have some time after today's webinar, we encourage you to take a visit to our website, chcworkforce.org. It is our special STAR Center website separate from ACU, and everything that you'll find on there will be free to access. We have a little something for everybody's learning style. We have audio trainings, e-learning courses, fact sheets, archived presentations and webinars and decks, and really anything that you could need. And if you are looking for something and not finding it, or are needing additional support in the areas of recruitment and retention, we are always happy to help to provide that technical assistance and direct you to any resources. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time at info@chcworkforce.org. It does not go to a robot. It goes directly to my inbox, and I will make sure to get that out to whomever is appropriate. But we love to hear from you, and we are always here and happy to help. This is our lovely STAR Center team. I am Sydney Axelrod. I'm going to be your presenter for today. I am the Associate Director of Workforce Development. I also have my lovely colleagues Mariah Blake and Dr. Michelle Fernandez Gabilondo on the line as well. And we are all happy to assist you at any point. When you get these slides, you'll have each of our individual emails here as well if you prefer to reach out directly. So that's who we are, and we're so glad that you're here with us today. Our focus of today is really going to be on this kind of final piece of the staff satisfaction survey life cycle, if you will, and that's what do we do with all this great information we've collected through our staff satisfaction surveys. And we're really going to focus on that response part. But as we get into it, I thought it might be good to do a little level setting and lay a little groundwork to make sure we're all on the same page about understanding what it is we're talking about when we talk about staff satisfaction surveys. So if you've been to any STAR Center trainings in the past, you've seen the slide. This is our little metaphor here, and this is how we think about workforce here. Your workforce is the fuel of your health center, right? We say it all the time. If you have no workforce, you have no health center. And so when we think about it this way, we think about a health center that has a full tank as one that is identifying workforce as an essential organizational issue, right? Not a nice to have, not an afterthought, but an essential organizational issue. And as such, is investing the appropriate operational and staffing resources into supporting that workforce. And as you're thinking about how you can maybe move that needle and get your workforce health center tank to be a little bit more full, staff satisfaction is one of the most invaluable measures that you can use as you're looking to improve your retention efforts. And the more improved your retention efforts are, the more success you will see in your recruitment efforts, because everybody is going to want to come work for a really excellent place to work. Now, this is one of those terms that we hear a lot, staff satisfaction. And so I thought I'd break it down for you all to see what are we really talking about here. Staff satisfaction is really, when it comes down to it, how content or satisfied your employees are with their jobs. And if we look at this graphic here, there are many, many factors that influence whether someone is satisfied or not. And this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just to give you an idea of all of the different factors and things that go into contributing to the experience your employees are having working for you, right? So things that are going to affect their satisfaction are their compensation, right? And that's more than just their salary, that's their benefits and other offerings that are available to them. Think total compensation package, right? Their workload, their resources that they are given to help them manage that workload, their perceptions of management, right? Anybody ever heard that old saying, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, right? Management has a really key role to play in the experience of our employees. The level of flexibility they have in their work, what teamwork looks like at your organization, again, those resources that are available to support your workforce, and many, many other factors as well. But this is just to get us to start thinking about all the different things that we are talking about when we're talking about staff satisfaction and all of the different things that you can be doing to move the needle on how satisfied your employees are at work. Now, a staff satisfaction survey specifically, right? There's a lot of names for this. Employee satisfaction survey is one that's also used a lot, right? This is an employee feedback tool that is going to allow you to find out about the employee experience directly from the employee themselves, right? That might seem a little obvious, but we can spend all day, sort of guessing what it is that our employees need, what's going to keep them satisfied, how they're experiencing their jobs at work. And at the end of the day, we're never going to know truly until we ask them. So your survey is a really great opportunity to get that feedback about the employee experience directly from the employees themselves. It's really, truly an invaluable tool for you as you're thinking about your overall workforce strategy and your retention efforts. Now, a lot of times we hear this term staff satisfaction kind of go hand in hand with this term employee engagement, right? We hear about employee engagement surveys and staff satisfaction surveys. And while they are similar and they're both valuable, there is a little bit of a distinction here to be made. So when we talk about staff satisfaction, really what we're talking about is the extent to which your employees are happy or content with their jobs and work environment, right? How satisfied are they? How content are they? Now, on the other hand, when we look at employee engagement, here we're looking at the extent to which employees feel passionate about their jobs, the extent to which they're committed to your organization, and the extent to which they're willing to put that discretionary effort into their work, right? So one of them is looking at how content and happy and satisfied are folks, and the other, employee engagement, is looking at how engaged are they? How motivated are they? How plugged in are they to the organization? And how willing are they to kind of go above and beyond, if you will, to contribute to your organization? So they are both very similar. not, hugely different, but there is a little bit of a distinction here. So I just thought I'd kind of make that clear for everybody. And really what we're focusing on today is staff satisfaction surveys. And if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into the employee engagement end of things, please reach out to us. We have a lot of other resources to help support and think about your employee engagement strategy for your organization. Now, why conduct a staff satisfaction survey? Listen, survey fatigue is real, right? And the bandwidths of our staff are real, right? We do not have unlimited time and capacity to do all the things that we would love to do. But conducting a staff satisfaction survey at least once per year is going to be a really, really beneficial investment of your time and energy when it comes to your workforce, right? So why do it in the first place? Staff satisfaction surveys are going to give you invaluable data that is going to help you to increase retention and decrease absenteeism. And not just absenteeism, right, when people don't show up, but also presenteeism, right? That's when people do physically show up, their bodies are in the room, but maybe that engagement piece isn't quite there, right? Maybe their brain's not really fully in it and they're kind of just showing up and going through the motions, right? So we'll see a decrease in both of those if we leverage a staff satisfaction survey as a tool to support our workforce efforts. We'll also see improved productivity, which is going to lead to an improved patient experience and is also going to lead to an overall increase in staff morale, right? There's really a lot of potential here for leveraging this type of tool to move the needle on all of these different issues that we know are critical and vital to your operational and organizational success. Retention is important, right? I think we all know this. And if you've been to our trainings, you've seen the slide before. Turnover is expensive, right? A lot of times it can feel so overwhelming to make these sort of initial upfront investments in staff satisfaction, in even doing something like a survey, right? But I'm here to tell you that that investment is going to be worth it, right? Because if we do not make that investment, we're going to see our rates of turnover keep climbing and climbing and climbing. And we know that this is affecting organizations across the healthcare sector, right? Really kind of get critical and ask yourselves, what is the actual cost of turnover? What does it actually cost us to have a provider vacancy? How much does it cost us to recruit to fill that vacancy? How much money are we losing to these workforce issues overall? And how can we maybe better invest that money instead of in hiring and hiring and hiring? Instead, invest that money in really improving the experience of our current staff and really getting those retention numbers up, right? So if you're curious how expensive turnover really is and how much it's really costing you, we encourage you to check out our financial assessment tool. It's an interactive tool. You can plug some numbers in and get some really great data back, and that will help you understand and make that sort of overall business case for why it is worthwhile to invest in our retention efforts. Because as we've said it once and we'll say it again, without data, you are just another person with an opinion, right? There are things that we all feel in our bones and we know to be true about our workforce experiences, about our organizational environments. But without the data to back that up, it is very, very hard to get the buy-in that we need from leadership to move the needle on those issues, right? So really want to lean into this idea of using data as a tool to back up what we know to be true, right? Or maybe what we don't know to be true. Maybe we'll learn something new, right? But without data, you are just another person with an opinion if you can't back it up, right? And that's why a staff satisfaction survey is such a valuable tool. It gives you the opportunity to collect real data, right? And when you're thinking about maybe starting a staff satisfaction survey for the first time, maybe you already have a process in place, but you're looking to retool it or revamp it. Maybe you're taking over this work from someone else who was leading it in the past. There are many, many different things to keep in mind as you're planning for a staff satisfaction survey. It is not a simple process. There are many, many steps to this. And so this kind of just lays out for you here some of the considerations when you're rolling out a staff satisfaction survey. Everything from what type of survey are we going to do? How often and when are we going to do it? What is it going to look like? Is it all going to be, Likert scale questions that ask folks to agree or disagree with a statement from strongly agree to strongly disagree? Is it going to be open-ended questions where folks can type in some more qualitative data? Is it going to be true or false questions, multiple choice questions, right? What does the design of that survey look like? Um, what kind of policy issues do we need to keep in mind as we're crafting our surveys? Legal issues, right? Compliance is important. How are we communicating this to our employees? That is a really critical piece here. And throughout all stages of conducting a staff satisfaction survey, that employee communications piece is going to remain a vital piece of this puzzle, right? How are you leveraging technology to conduct this survey? Are you using SurveyMonkey or Google Forms or another platform that's out there that's available? Are you giving people the option to print out and hand write in their surveys, right? How are we leveraging the tools available to us when we're thinking about what this looks like, right? How do we then interpret the results, right? And then you'll see this little arrow here. This is where our focus is going to be today on survey follow-up and what happens beyond just conducting the survey. Because the reality is, you can have considered every single other thing on this list. You design the most beautiful survey, it is user friendly. You roll it out at a time that is not super hectic for everybody, so they have time to fill it out. We were doing great. We interpret the results, we have some wonderful insights. If the process stops there and we don't get to this follow-up stage, you're going to have a lot less value coming out of this process, right? It is really critical to think about what we are doing with the data that we are collecting. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And as I mentioned, this is a multi-step process, right? It starts with collecting information, and then we analyze the information, and then we communicate the results to our staff, and then we act on what we have learned, right? And I think that that last bucket of taking action can sometimes be the hardest one, right? Because that's the one that's going to take some lifting and some investment and some stepping outside of our comfort zones and trying new things. So that's what we're going to talk about today, responding to our staff satisfaction surveys. I'm going to pause here for a moment. I'd love to hear from you all. Please feel free to type your answers into the chat. But I want to know, where are all of you in your staff satisfaction survey work? Is this something that you're regularly doing? Do you do a survey once a year or twice a year? Do you do no surveys? But I want to hear from you all. What are you doing in terms of staff satisfaction surveys? And if you feel comfortable sharing, how is it going? Is it working? Is it challenging? Twice a year survey. Thank you, Victor. That's great. Even better than once a year. Annually. Thank you, Clifford. A staff satisfaction and engagement survey once a year. That's great. Thank you, Becky. Cecilia says a survey once a year. Struggle with the follow-up portion. You are not alone, Cecilia, and you are in the right place. So hopefully you'll leave here today with some ideas about how you can kind of move things forward in that space. A big one annually, and then mini surveys as touch points more often. Tiffany, that is fantastic. That's a really great strategy, and we actually really recommend that. Is sort of like that one big lift of the annual survey to collect a lot of information, and maybe those less formal touch-in points throughout, so you can continue to have more data coming in real time. Let's see, Jody. New hire surveys, 30, 90 days, and then an annual engagement survey with a semi-annual check-in of 3 questions. It's beautiful. I love that. That sounds like a really thoughtful process. And I love the attention to new hires as well. There's so much great information to be learned from people who are just starting within our organization. Shalonda says, ooh, my computer would scroll. There we go. All right, once a year and a pulse check at quarterly, annually. Very good. All right, thank you all so much for sharing, and just kind of wanted to get a sense of where we are in our staff satisfaction survey journeys. But it sounds like there's a lot of really great stuff happening, and there's always room for improvement. But I'm glad to hear that so many of you are thinking about this and paying attention to it. And this is the kind of process that every single time we do it, whether that's every year or every quarter, however often it's happening, there's always the opportunity to learn from that process, right? So we're obviously learning from the data itself, what information we're collecting. But as the people who are in charge of creating and disseminating and doing something with the surveys, we can learn something too about the process every time, right? What worked well? What didn't? What was our response rate like? How might we incentivize people to participate, right? There's so much learning we can do just about the organization itself as we continue to do this process more and more and get it really codified into our organizational and operational strategy. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that a lot of you really have already started this work. And let's see if maybe we can improve it a little bit. So thank you for sharing. And please keep your comments, your successes, your challenges, anything that comes to mind, please put it in the chat. I think there's such a wonderful opportunity in these sessions for you all to learn from one another, since you are on the ground doing this work every single day. So responding to staff satisfaction surveys. When we think about responding to feedback in general, I like this quote from Henry Ford, right? If you always do what you have always done, then you will always get what you have always got, right? And if we really think about it, I want you to think about a time when you gave feedback and did not hear anything back. How did that feel? You can think about that yourself. You can put it in the chat if you'd like. But how does it feel especially when somebody asks you for your feedback and then radio silence after you've gone out of your way and taken your time to provide it? I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that it did not feel very good, right? I know I've experienced this. It doesn't feel good at all. I don't feel heard. I don't feel valued. I don't feel respected, right? Especially if I've been invited to share that feedback and then nothing, right? It's like, why'd you even ask me in the first place? So this is the kicker, right? Listen, receiving feedback is not always an easy thing. I want to be really honest and real about this, right? It can be very difficult to receive negative feedback. I think we're all just wired as humans that way, right? It's hard to hear when something that we're doing and we're putting a lot of effort into is not working for people or they're not happy with us, right? Maybe not with us, but with the work, right? It can be really challenging. And so I really want to encourage us all to push past that discomfort and really practice our skills in terms of receiving feedback. Because it's really important that we respond to feedback. Asking for feedback and creating the space for people to share is simply not enough. We need to do something about it, right? If there is a lack of response on the part of the organization and those in positions of leadership to survey feedback, that is going to directly lead to a lack of employee engagement, right? If you're rolling out a staff satisfaction or an employee engagement survey, any type of survey to your staff, what you're communicating to them is we value your perspective. We want to hear from you. We're listening. We want to learn about what your experience is like and how we can help improve it. Right? So imagine now that's the message. People take time out of their day to share very vulnerable, honest feedback with you about their experience, and then nothing changes and nothing is acknowledged. And we don't even, have a circle back to say what we learned, right? If I'm the employee that took my time to fill out that survey, I'm thinking, man, they really didn't care about what I had to say, right? They really don't value my perspective and my opinion, or they would have done something with all the great information I shared with them, right? And so when we see this lack of engagement, we're going to see all of these other consequences, right? It's not like a small thing, right? This is the kind of stuff that is very easy to get kicked down the road and pushed off the desk because there's more pressing, urgent things going on. Oh, we conducted the survey, but we just don't have time to do anything about it, right? There's going to be real consequences to taking that approach and to not taking this full cycle of then acting and communicating seriously, right? So if we start to see that lack of engagement, we're going to see decreased productivity. We're going to see those turnover rates go up. We're going to see morale go down. We're going to see increased team dysfunction, missed opportunities to innovate. You're going to have, at the end of the day, you're going to have damage to your reputation and your employer brand, right? Because people are going to start having this feeling of, I don't like working here because I don't feel valued. And that's going to hurt your recruitment efforts as well as your retention efforts. So this may seem like a kind of a light piece of work, if you will, or a less important or less high priority piece of work, but the stakes are actually quite high, especially if you're going to go through all of the time and effort to put together and roll out that survey. It is so, so critical that we think about how we're going to respond to it. So communication, communication, communication. right? I think a lot of times there is a lot of fear and discomfort around having to say no, right? No one wants to be the one to say no, right? If your employees are taking their time to fill out your surveys and what the survey data is telling you is that people want more higher salaries and they want more paid vacation days, and they would really love to see some healthier snacks in the break room and would love more opportunities for connection and communication across teams, right? I made that up, right? But maybe that's something that you're learning through your employee engagement survey. You might not be able to just do all of those things, right? Even if it's unanimous, even if everybody is asking for the same thing, it might not be possible to do all the things that they're asking for, right? Budgets are finite, right? You might literally not have the funds to give people an increase in their salary if that's what they're asking for. And so a lot of times when we find ourselves in these situations where someone has, voiced a need or a want or asked for something and we're unable to give it to them, it feels uncomfortable to say no. We don't want to say no. And so we say, oh, maybe, or, we'll look into it, or I'll get back to you about that, or, I'm not sure, right? We kind of try to kick the can down the road and not really confront it and deal with it because it feels uncomfy, right? But I really want to encourage you to push past that feeling of discomfort and really lean into values of transparency and vulnerability and honesty. Because if we center those in the way we communicate with our staff, you will see the reward tenfold. People understand that, they perceive that, and it makes them feel more valued and more willing to contribute to your organization, right? So I'm not saying a flat out no, right? People ask for things and just no, we can't do that, right? Because that's not very helpful either. It's really important to share the why and the context as much as you possibly can, right? Listen, we understand that sometimes certain types of information are confidential, or there may be policies or regulations around what you can and cannot share. So, by all means, please respect those guidelines where they are. However, it's still important to share what you can, right? So it doesn't have to be a hard no or like maybe we'll see later. It should look something like this. We heard you all in your staff satisfaction survey. There was a majority of responses indicating that you would all, love to see an increase in your base salaries. Unfortunately, at this time, that's not going to be possible. And here is why, right? Maybe it's because our budget has been set for the next 2 fiscal years and there is no opportunity to change it. Maybe there's other financial strains on the organization, right? Here, I'm sorry, no, here's why. Here's what would need to change in order for that answer to change, right? As much information as you can possibly share is going to be better, right? So be really clear what changes are possible and what changes are not possible. And if they're not possible, try as much as you can to share the why, right? We simply don't have the staffing capacity to support an initiative like that right now. Should we find ourselves having our staff grown over the next couple of years, we might be able to revisit a program like that, right? I made that up, something like that. But the more that you can share instead of just saying no or just saying nothing, this isn't possible, this is why it's not possible, this is what we can either offer you as an alternative, or this is what would need to change for that answer to change. When you're thinking about communicating survey results to your staff, you really want to be intentional about this, right? Depending on the type of platform you're using to capture the data through the survey, you might have a nice option to, make a couple pie charts and make an Excel spreadsheet with lots of data. And that's lovely, but we probably don't want to just share all the raw data with our staff, right? We really want to think strategically about how we are communicating results to our staff, right? And so the way that you choose to communicate those results is going to depend on your audience, right? Did you ask all employees across the organization all the same questions? If so, you should be communicating those results to all employees across the organization, right? If there were portions or whole parts of the survey that were specific to individual teams, that might be something you want to explore, is having meetings with individual teams to go over those individual team survey results, right? There's no right or wrong here. The point is that you're being really thoughtful about who you're asking questions to and then who you're sharing the results with, right? And a lot of times this can look like a little bit of both, right? Maybe we at the next all hands meeting, or maybe once a quarter we have an all staff meeting. Maybe that's a good opportunity to go through kind of the broad strokes and the high level themes that we have analyzed from the staff satisfaction survey results that apply to everyone. And then maybe we set up individual team meetings to do a little bit of a deeper dive so we can have smaller discussions and conversations where people can participate and ask questions, right? You can think about your facilitation design there. There's a lot of ways to go about this. But the important part is that you're thinking about your audience when you're making those decisions, right? The more results you can reveal to the more people across your organization, the more you're going to be able to foster trust, right? If you've conducted a smaller scale survey, it's always a good idea to share those results with only the employees and teams who participated, right? If you only surveyed your medical assistants, we probably don't need to have our front desk staff in the meeting where we're going over the results, right? If we, something important to think about here, because we get this question a lot, especially if you have a smaller health center or you have certain teams that are quite small, is how do we then maintain the anonymity of people, right? If we have sort of stratified results by department, but there's only 3 people in this department, it becomes a little bit less anonymous, right? And so this is why we always encourage you to reference averaged results and really be thoughtful about that. If there is just too small of a sample size that you think you're gonna, not be able to maintain that anonymity, really rethink how you want to share that information, right? But always, whenever you can, reference average results and make sure there's no identifying factors that could, especially if we're dealing with things like qualitative data, where we've asked folks to write in responses. We don't want people to know who said what, especially if the initial premise of the survey was that this is going to be anonymous feedback, right? Because what's that going to do? It's going to tank your trust, right, of your employees in you. So when you're thinking about communicating the data, get a little creative here. Think outside the box. Consider putting together a nice visual presentation with some infographics or some charts, right? Any other visual ways to show the data. It's always really important to remember that everybody has a different learning style. And so some people might want to read through a very detailed written report, and other people might just want to like flip through and get kind of the high level takeaways in picture or infographic form. And so whenever you have an opportunity to incorporate more sort of modalities of learning, we encourage you to do that, right? But really be strategic, because sometimes this can get overwhelming. Like, we've asked for a lot of information. We've now received back a lot of information. We've got a lot to sort of sort through here. How do we know what's most important to share? Really be strategic here. We don't need to share every single result to every single question if we don't think it's going to be the most valuable and relevant use of our time, right? So be strategic in identifying like the limited number of relevant hotspots within, with this kind of overall goal of developing action plans around them with your team, right? So if there are certain things that hey, we can make a change here, that's probably where you're going to want to focus here. And this is the last point here, but it is certainly not the least point. This is very important. Do not try to spin the data. Sometimes this can be easier said than done, especially if you've conducted a survey and you're looking at the data you've gotten back and you're kind of analyzing it and you're sitting there and saying, wow, this is pretty negative. This isn't looking so good. People are pretty unhappy, right? That's okay. That's such valuable information that does not reflect a failure on anyone's part. Don't try to make it look better, right? Don't spin the data. Let the data speak for itself and be really realistic and honest about it. The more honest and transparent and vulnerable you are, especially if you're in a position of leadership, the more benefits you're going to see in terms of building trust and increased retention amongst your staff, right? So just one more point on this idea of not spinning the data. And you can find more information about this in some of our other resources about the other parts of this process. But really, when you're designing the staff satisfaction survey, that could be a whole other hour. So we're not going to focus on that today. But I will say, when you're designing your survey, it's really important that you're not designing it with an end goal in mind, right? This is where that data spin comes in. Don't design a survey thinking, I want the survey to show that everyone is really happy. And so I'm gonna, formulate my questions in such a way that I get the results that I want, right? That is not real data with real integrity, right? So don't try to spin the data. Don't try to manipulate it or manufacture it or try to get the outcome that you would ideally love to see, right? We need to be honest and real here. That's the whole point of doing this type of work and of leaving our surveys anonymous as a tool for helping us to get there. Okay. That's communicating the results, right? That's communicating what we learned when we looked at the data we collected. What comes next is communicating the actions that are actually going to take place as a result of what we learned from the data, right? And so again, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, transparency is key, right? Even if it's a hard answer, even if it's hard, if it's a no, if it's an I'm sorry, we can't do that, right? It's still important to be honest about what you can and cannot change, right? And by communicating the next steps, real, tangible, actionable steps that are going to happen, that is what's going to demonstrate to your staff that leadership is taking these survey results seriously and therefore taking them seriously, right? As actions are being taken, as you're starting to try things and implement some changes based on what you've learned, make sure that you keep the staff in the loop about that, right? Make sure you keep them in the loop on the progress, on the impacts that it's having, how things are going, successes, challenges, right? The more you can share it, the better, right? And remember that these tangible results are what is going to propel your engagement forward. It's what's going to foster that really critical buy-in that you need to transform your organization to make it a fantastic place to work where you have nearly no turnover and incredibly high retention rates. And if you're sitting there thinking, Sydney, that is not possible in this landscape, I will tell you, I was just on a call with a health center this morning, and they told me that they have an over 80% retention rate of their staff. And that is not by accident. That is very much by design of a lot of hard work that they're putting into retaining their staff. So I just share that to you to say that it is possible and that this tool, the data you've collected from your staff satisfaction survey is just the most incredible starting point for you to start making some small changes to get your numbers up. Okay. So I'm talking a lot about this idea of taking action and taking our next steps. And I want to talk a little specifically about what that looks like, because I think that can be a little intimidating sometimes, right? We've collected all this great data. We've analyzed the data. We've kind of pulled out these high-level trends of where people are satisfied and where there's room to grow in terms of satisfaction, right? We would like to try something based on this feedback to move the needle. Where do we start and how do we do that, right? And so this is where the idea of creating and implementing an action plan is, right? The goal here is not to like fly by the seat of our pants and, try something and throw some spaghetti at the wall, right? The idea is to be strategic and intentional about how we're choosing to respond to that data and what we're willing to try, right? So when I talk about action planning, I'm talking about an approach, right? Not a specific method, but kind of a more overarching approach that's going to help you focus ideas and decide what steps you need to take to achieve particular goals, right? It's a statement of what you want to achieve over a given period of time. And this is a multi sort of step process here, and this comes from the Penn State extension, right? But you can see here, we start with defining the problem, collecting and analyzing the data. We've already done that through our beautiful, brilliant staff satisfaction surveys, right? Then we clarify and prioritize the problems, right? What is the most important and most realistic for us to take action on, right? We can write a goal statement for each solution, implement solutions, try them. That is the action plan. Once you've implemented it, that's not enough. We need to monitor it and evaluate it. And then we start all over again, right? Either with a new problem because that was a great fix, or maybe it wasn't a great fix and we need to try a different solution, right? There is no shame in trying something and having it not work, right? It's better than not trying at all, I promise you. And you will learn something from that process, right? So an action plan is a document. It is our ideas and our aspirations really codified and written down, right? It's a document that lists what steps must be taken to achieve a specific goal. It breaks down the goal into actionable steps that can be easily followed and tracked, right? We're kind of breaking down the whole pie into smaller bites so it's a little less intimidating. And also so that we can be really clear about the roles, responsibilities, and expectations for those who are going to be involved in this new plan, right? So we're getting really specific here. What tasks will be done? Who will be responsible for doing them? And by when should they be responsible for doing them, right? The more detail, the better. You are setting yourselves up for success, especially if you have folks moving in and out of roles. If you have a really clear action plan, anybody should be able to come in and pick up where the last person left off and continue moving the plan forward, right? So more specificity is always better here. It should include areas in your action plan for gaps and barriers, opportunities, strategies for improvement, and timeline. Again, more information is better, specific is better, especially if we're trying to build that organizational buy-in and we want to make sure we're being comprehensive and thoughtful and that all of our bases are covered. So, it's not enough to just build a great action plan. We really want to think about it being a collaborative plan, right? That involves our staff and the key stakeholders in it. So set aside some time to speak with the team members to get their input on the overall results and their thoughts on how to address them, right? And these are the results of your staff satisfaction survey we're talking about here. So you could sit there, analyze your data, identify some key themes, and say, oh, I think we should try XYZ initiative to help move the needle on this data that we collected, right? On this sort of negative outcome or whatever it is. That's great. It's probably a good idea to run that idea past your staff and see if it's something that they would actually be interested in to help address whatever the challenge is, right? And so there's a lot of ways we can do this. We really recommend something that looks like a listening session, where you can walk through the survey adult results. You can sort of highlight any of those key pain points and key successes too, right? It's important to balance and make sure that we're calling out the things that are working well and the things that are positive, right? And engage everyone in a discussion on how to best take action on the results, right? Really think about this as like crowdsourcing your solutions, right? And what that's going to do for you is that's going to build immediate buy-in, right? From minute one, because folks now have been asked to provide feedback. They've been circled back to for someone to say, hey, this is what we learned from your feedback, right? You're already winning there, right? And, how do we think we should move forward with this feedback? What do you think we can do from here, right? Really getting folks engaged in the process is going to make them feel valued and heard and respected and like they have that real buy-in and engaged, right? They're going to want to be engaged in this process of trying to make the organization better and make the experience of all of their colleagues better, right? So really lean into your listening skills here, your basic communication skills. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just zip it and listen, right? And just create space for people to talk. Now, some of you are probably thinking this because I say things like this and people get scared and say, oh no, but what if it gets really negative, right? What if I, zip it and create space for people to share and it becomes this like naggy vent fest, right? That's okay. Sometimes people just need space to be heard, right? And you can still control and facilitate and guide the conversation, right? You can always jump in and say, hey, listen, I hear you all. I can tell this is really important to you all. I'd like to shift our focus to some tangible things that we can do about it, right? Shift that focus to the future and to making changes, right? But sometimes even just like creating that space to let it breathe a little bit and let people share can be so, so valuable, right? And think about ways that you can quickly respond to feedback, right? Maybe something's a quick fix. Maybe you learned that people hate the snacks that you have provided for them in the break room, right? Maybe that was really nice that you offered free snacks, but everybody hates them and they're not eating them. What if you just have the same budget but buy different snacks, right? And ask people what they would rather have, right? That's a simple example, but sometimes things are low-hanging fruit, and wherever there's low-hanging fruit, grab it, right? And try to find those ways that you can quickly respond to feedback. Right? Not everything is going to have a quick fix. Some things are going to take a longer term investment. So take those little wins where you can and try things where you can. Okay. Some of you might be familiar with this kind of framework of SMART goals, right? If you're setting goals for for improving Make sure that your goals are smart, make sure they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, right? So, an example of a not so smart goal would be, by next year's survey, we're going to see a 75% increase in staff satisfaction. That's nice. It's a nice goal. It is not specific. Maybe it's measurable. I don't know how attainable it is. It's probably relevant, but I don't know about timely, right? I just don't know because it's so vague and so broad, right? We really want to get specific, right? Things that we can measure, things that are actually realistic. So this is by no means something we created. This is a very well-known framework, but I think it's really helpful, especially when you're thinking about setting goals for the future, making sure that they're smart. Here's just an example of some action plans or some things that you might choose to do as a result, depending on what your surveys reveal, right? So something like adding in a monthly team huddle, right? That could help improve communication, right? Especially, I mean, we hear this all the time, that a lot of times what health centers learn from these surveys is that people feel really siloed and really isolated, and they feel like there's a real lack of communication, whether it's sort of vertical communication, if you will, to and from leadership. It could also be a challenge in like lateral communication between teams, between department, right? And so if you're finding out from your survey that folks are feeling sort of like a lack of effective communication, how can we create new spaces and new meetings or whatever those are to create that space for that communication to happen, right? Um, Even if it's like this could be something small, right? This doesn't have to be super time consuming. Maybe you learned from your staff, from your survey, that people are feeling really disconnected from one another on a personal level, right? That they are effectively doing their work, but they don't feel engaged. They don't feel like they really know anybody that they're working with. Maybe that's something simple like adding a new channel on your Slack or your Teams that's just moments of joy, right? Where people can share silly things or moments of gratitude, where people can share appreciation with each other, right? That could be a physical bulletin board in your location, right? Little things like that are things that we can try to improve the challenges that came up in our surveys, right? Maybe you learned that people are not clear about whose job it is to do which task, right? Whose plate does this fall on? So make a one pager clarifying those job roles, right? Maybe people are feeling really unrecognized and unsupported, and maybe we can try a staff recognition practice. Let's just try it for 60 days and see how it goes, right? Maybe after those 60 days, we do another one of those little pulse checks to check in with people and see, ask them just a couple questions, right? See if they like it, see if it's doing anything for them, right? Um, I like this last idea of starting a quarterly, like you said, we did update in your newsletter, right? This is an opportunity to really keep people engaged in this process and keep reminding them that you heard them and that you're working on it and that you're trying things, right? Um, Excellent. So these are just a few ideas, right? This is not, by no means telling you that this is what your action plan should be, but this is an example of what some of those actions might look like, right? So it's one thing to learn from your survey, we're struggling with communication. It's another to come up with a really concrete, tangible plan of something that we're going to try to do something about it. And listen, do not let perfect be the enemy of good here, right? You do not need to have a perfect brand new communication system where you reinvent the wheel and add 50 new meetings, right? We can start small, right? But do something, try something, because that's what's going to communicate to your staff that you are listening and that you value them. And that you cannot put a price on that when it comes to your retention rates and decreasing your turnover, right? Everybody just wants to feel heard, right? It is like a basic human need. Um, when you try things, this is another kind of well-known framework, the PDSA, right? When we try something new, when we implement a change, we follow this process. We start at the top. We plan, we do, we study, we act, we start all over again, right? So this is just to remind us that this is not a linear process of like, we've come up with a really detailed, great action plan, and now we implement it, right? It doesn't end there, right? That just got you from plan to do, right? Now we really need to study, we need to evaluate, we need to monitor, and we need to make continual changes and remain nimble and adaptive based on what we're learning in real time. So I will end today's session and then, have a few minutes for some questions with this quote, which I think, really kind of sums it up nicely. Data storytelling is the ability to convey data not just in numbers or charts, but as a narrative that humans can comprehend. So, just as with any good story, a data tale has to have a beginning and a middle and an end, right? It needs to be presented with the proper context, right? I cannot stress that last piece enough. Proper context is everything, right? And so, what this is really saying is, you know, it's great to collect information from your staff. It's great to analyze it and come up with some insights. It's even better to then communicate what you've learned back to them. It's important that what you're communicating back to them has some meaning behind it, that we're contextualizing it, right? That we're not just throwing numbers at people, right? That we're really contextualizing it and saying, this is what we learned, right? And it's not enough to just have learned something. This is what we learned, and this is what we're thinking we might do about it, right? This is what we're going to try to do based on what we learned, right? That is the action part of this process. And that is going to be where you start to see growth for your organization, right? Even if you try something and it doesn't work, there is more value in trying something that doesn't work than there is in doing nothing, right? Because doing nothing communicates to your staff that they have no voice within your organization and that you don't really care what their staff experience is like, right? You may think that by issuing a survey, you're communicating that you care. But if you're not doing anything with those survey results, if you're not making any meaningful changes, if you're not trying things or trying to make things better based on what you've learned, right? You're not getting a lot of value out of that, right? And your staff are smart. They feel that. They know that. They say, listen, it's nice that you ask me, but are you going to do anything about it? Right? And if I've taken this survey for the last 5 years and I've never once seen leadership do anything about it, you think I'm going to be likely to want to take time out of my day to sit and fill out that survey for the sixth time? Probably not, right? You're going to see your response rates go down. You're going to see overall morale go down, right? And that's what we want to avoid, right? So it's not enough just to ask your staff. You need to be able to do something based on what they tell you, right? Um, Putting your action plan into practice. Reliably follow through on timing for quarterly and annual survey questions, right? Be consistent. Continue to ensure that employees feel safe in giving honest answers by maintaining confidentiality and humble curiosity regarding critical feedback, right? I cannot stress that part enough. If people, I've been in situations where somebody in a leadership position asks me for feedback on something, and I lean into my like radical vulnerability and honesty, and they say I'm safe to share, and I'm transparent, and I share my truth, right? And then I've been met with defensiveness and rebuttals and argumentativeness, right? And that makes me feel like, oh, okay, you didn't really care what I had to say, right? You were just on the ready to like hold your ground, right? And that's what we want to avoid. We really want to think about building a culture of learning, of growth, of taking a strengths-based perspective, right? So certainly confidentiality is important to instilling that trust that people know there's going to be no retribution for anything that they might share, right? And that no one's going to get mad or defensive about what we shared. We are asking people to share their experience. And so we really need to be open-minded about really listening to them and hearing what their experiences are like, even if it's a little uncomfortable, right? Don't get too focused and lost in the details. Don't lose the forest because you're focusing on the trees, right? Look at those trends over time to guide your organizational priorities and needs, right? If you're doing this survey annually or more than once a year, it's a really good idea to be able to have at least a few, if not all, of the questions that stay consistent, right? Maybe not all, but there should be some that are consistent, right? And so then we can measure trends over time and see how things have changed, right? It's important to take that kind of bird's eye view to things and not get lost in the weeds of what happened last month and how are people responding to it next month, right? That's important too, but there might be a bigger trend at play here. And then lastly, avoid reactive decisions that are based on limited information or point in time frustrations. This is such an important point, right? You could have the most thoughtfully collaboratively, beautifully, wonderfully designed survey of all time and roll it out to people. And even so, you are still only capturing how they felt that day, that hour, that half an hour about things, right? And I don't know about all of you, but I'm a pretty moody person. And so if you ask me something on Tuesday, I might have a different answer about how I feel about it on Thursday, right? And so this is always just important for us to remember that what we have captured in our surveys is really just one moment in time, right? And so keep that in mind and don't get too caught up in that, right? Especially if they're point in time frustrations that might not be, representative of the larger staff group's needs overall, right? So it kind of goes both ways. It's like we don't want to lose sight of the forest by focusing on the trees, and we also don't want to lose sight of the trees by only focusing on the forest either, right? We got to find a balance there of really listening to people, but not being reactive, right? We want to be thoughtful and strategic about the steps that we take based on what we've learned. Okay. Thank you all so much for your patience. I know that was a lot of information that I just kind of rattled off at you. There's so much to talk about and explore here in the world of staff satisfaction surveys. If you are interested in learning more about any parts of this process, please reach out to us. Please peruse our website. We've got a lot of really great archived resources around this topic. And we know that it's important and that it's not easy work. So I really appreciate you all for joining us here today, and for your attention and for your thoughtful responses in the chat. Your survey should pop up in just a moment, but in the meantime, I'll stay on for the next couple of minutes. If anyone has any questions for me about any of this, please put them in the chat, and I will go ahead and try my best to answer those. And then, of course, just a reminder for you all to stay in touch with us. We love to hear from you. We want to make sure our offerings are valuable to you. So we really appreciate your time here today. We appreciate you filling out this feedback survey. Just it will take you a couple seconds. You can think of that as your ticket out the door once you filled that out. But thank you all so much. And while you're all filling this out, I will share something that I got in a private message from someone who had to leave. But this is really great. For their annual engagement survey, their executive leadership team goes off-site for a half a day and scours through the results, compares them to past years, trends areas where the scores are lowest, and develops an action plan for the coming year. The plan and results are shared with the supervisor group, and then once they agree and are aware, the results and action plan are then shared with all employees and the board. And then they also review the prior year's action plan and what was done and not done and why. And for the new hire survey and the semi-annual check-in, those results are shared with the supervisory team and action items developed from those ones. That is an incredible model. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's a lot that we can all learn from that process in the way of communication and transparency and buy-in, right? And paying attention to the bigger picture. So let that all be a lesson to you all that it is possible to do this. It is possible to create the time and the space to do it in a thoughtful and productive way. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you to everybody else for joining. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and the rest of the year. Have a great holiday season. If we don't see you, this is our last webinar for 2025. So we will catch you all at the next one in 2026. And in between, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to help.